Sona is one of the most misunderstood champions in the game. People think she's easy, but in reality she's extremely hard. I'm a Master Sona 1 trick who hit top 10 Sonas in NA, and this is part 2 of my 5-step guide on how to master Sona. Last time we talked about her abilities, so if you would like to check that out after this video, it will be in the description below. This video, as you probably guessed, will be discussing her runes. Let's get into it. Runes seem pretty simple, but Sona makes use of them the most out of any support, so when optimizing her gameplay, it's important to build your runes correctly and play around them. And if you do so, you'll be rewarded heavily. A lot of the mastery on this champion is based on how you work on these, so we'll be talking first about how to build your runes, and after that, we will be talking about how we play with them and the optimizations we can do to get the most value out of the runes. Alright, let's start with rune building. For Sona, 99% of the time, we're going sorcery first. And that is because Summon Airy is insanely good. This rune procs on all your auras, and there are very few games where Comet is going to be better, but it is possible in a lane where you need to poke people, like with an Ezreal, into a very low-range AD carry. You can go it. Otherwise, you want to stick with Airy for pretty much every game that is below Master or Grandmaster. Next necessity is going to be Mana Flow Band. The other two options, Arcanist and Nimbus Cloak, are not very useful. The mana problems you have in the early game get resolved a lot because of Mana Flow Band, so it's a near necessity. And this is where we can talk about one of two options. Transcendence and Celerity are going to be your only two, as Absolute Focus is kind of a fake rune. You're going to be mid to low health in the difficult lanes anyway, so we want to pick something that helps us. Celerity is better if you like playing for catches. You want to get your power chord out, and the survivability exists for sure, but a majority of the time, if you're positioning well anyway, Celerity is fake in terms of survivability. And the other option is Transcendence. Transcendence gives us 10 ability haste in the mid game. The last effect is basically fake. So if your goal is to protect your team with shields and rotate through your abilities, Transcendence is going to be the better option. You want to play for your power chord a little more. If you think you need to dodge skill shots, Celerity is just as good. I prefer Transcendence because I like getting the most value through good positioning. So we're going with that one, but Celerity works as well. And the last one is Gathering Storm versus Scorch. Scorch is risky, and we actually have a better option now thanks to the changes, Water Walking. The buffs on Water Walking have been insane. 10 movement speed is whatever, but the adaptive force early game is not to be ignored. It gives you a lot more adaptive force up until the 30-minute mark, which the games usually shouldn't go to anyway. So if you think you're going to play in the river a lot, consider Water Walking. If you are going to not play in the river, play for your lanes, Gathering Storm is going to be the safer option. We're going to go Gathering Storm, as this sorcery page is going to be the best bread and butter general page to go, and then we can build off of it in the future based on game state. Now we have two options between Resolve and Precision. I have a preference. Let's start with Precision, which, if you are going Precision, the only reason you are going it is for Presence of Mind. Presence of Mind is extremely helpful because it lets you skip tier. If you get a single takedown, you get a ton of mana back, about as much as a tier would give you. It does require that you get the takedown in the first place, which is the hard part, but if you do, it's very useful. The extra mana, like 6 mana early game, is kind of fake. It's actually reduced by 80%, or to 80%, sorry. So keep that in mind. The other two options are Legend Haste and Cutdown. Cutdown, you would go if you're really trying to win the early game with the Comet, but a majority of the time, Legend Haste is really good. The 15 ability haste is pretty significant, as that's the same as like a full items ability haste a lot of the time, and stacking it up is pretty easy because you enchant your team who is doing a dragon, and you'll get the credit even if you're not there when it dies. All right, and the other option, Resolve. Resolve has a lot of options to go, but you are always going to pick Revitalize. This rune is stupid. This rune will often shield just as much as Aerie shields in the game, and I play around Aerie, so when I look at the stats in post, this is surprising. It scales with Aerie, it scales with W, it scales with Moonstone. And early game, you're not buying a lot of heal and shield power. If you're going the bread and butter build, which is going to be something we touch on in the future, then Revitalize is something that scales very well with your early game items, and you usually don't get heal and shield power in the build up until third item. This will shield alone more than Aerie, but it also heals with your W, and there are ways to optimize it as well. The next option is not as clear cut. It's going to be conditioning, bone plating, and shield dash. It's pretty clear when you take shield dash, when you want to win the early game and you think extra damage is useful, but you also want to go revitalize tree for the mid to late game just in case. Shield dash is a good option, especially with Nyla, because you can double proc the shield. I can go over that when we talk about playing around the runes, but before then, let's talk about conditioning and bone plating. Conditioning is going to be your safe option every single time. The extra armor and magic resist grants you about 9 MR in armor once it procs, and that actually lets you play the mid games a lot easier because the resistances allow you to throw power chords without dying. I often survive at very, very low HP, and without this rune, that wouldn't be the case. Bone plating you only take if your lane is very hard, because it will get outvalued by conditioning in the late game, but sometimes you need to survive the lane. Let's say they don't have a poke champion, they're playing like Samira Not. If we get hit once, we're dead, and there's no way around it. Bone plating might make us survive once, so we take it for that scenario. And lastly, we have the shards. We are going to treat the shards like the rest of the runes, where we will have a default page and some other options that are good. Starting with the top, the only real options are ability haste and adaptive force. We never want to go attack speed, since the poke in your lane doesn't really need the attack speed. You're not going to see us a lot, and adaptive force is going to be our default as it's higher value than going haste because we have mana problems in the early game. In the late game, however, even mid to late, after like an item or two, ability haste is technically better because ability haste is harder to come by, but adaptive force is safe for the lane, and the lane is the hardest part for Sona. We're going to take this one. And on the second shard, you're actually able to go all three options, in my opinion. I like going adaptive force as the default, but the move speed is nice to play, especially if you have celerity, and the health scaling is going to be taking place when you're getting focused in games. If you see a lot of assassins, if you have a very tanky comp that doesn't really need your heal and shield as much as it needs you to survive to provide it, the health scaling is going to be better. If you have a certain comp that has a tankier team, the heal and shield is going to be a lot less value because they already have a lot of effective health. But the problem is, if you die, you're not able to provide it. You're not able to provide movement speed. You're not able to provide power chord. So health scaling is your best defensive option. I like going adaptive force. Last one is flat versus scaling health. This is just going to be based on the comp. Do they have a very early game heavy comp, and will you outscale guaranteed into the mid game? Big flat. Otherwise, if you think you can play the lane well enough, go health scaling, since health scaling outvalues flat health at like level 6, 7. And honestly, if you play well, I personally think that scaling health is fine to agree. It's not a big commitment, but it is going to be helpful in the late game because I always, again, survive on very low HP. That combined with conditioning scaling is very nice. All right. Let's do a quick overview of what we just talked about. Aerie is a must. We will be taking it every game until we are masters, grandmaster, and understand when to take Comet. Mana flow is going to be 100% of the time. There's no question. We're taking Comet. Celerity and Transcendence are going to be preference, although I believe that good positioning rewards Transcendence more. So the better you are at the game, the better Transcendence is going to be. Celerity can help you get out of bad lanes, and it can allow you to play for yourself more, especially by Swifties if you get the MS Shard. So I would test it out and go upon preference. And for the Gathering Storm page, it's going to be Gathering Storm or Water Walking. A majority of the time, it's Gathering Storm. If you hate your ADC and you really like roaming, Water Walking is extremely good value. And the next page, we want Revitalize, and then between Conditioning, Bone Plating, and Shield Bash, game dependent, with Conditioning being the common version. If you want to skip here, we go Presence of Mind, Legend Haste, cut down if you're going that early game poke with the Kama, with the Scourge, with the, well, like the Ezreal bot lane. Aside from that, this is solid. And then for our shards, ability haste or adaptive force, depending on if you're playing for early or late, the second shard, all three are viable. Upon preference, adaptive force is going to be your safest option. And then lastly, do you need to survive early game, or do you think you can play well enough to get to level 7? All right, that's going to be it for rune building. Let's talk about how we play around the runes we used. So we already know what Sona's abilities do, and we know that there are a couple ways to use Q. You can use it to push the wave, you can use it to poke a single enemy, hit both if you can, and tag our allies with it. But now that we have runes, we can optimize the usage of an ability like Q. So here is the TLDR on runes. Because all the runes help us a majority of the time, there are ways to play around almost, if not all of them, and optimizing how we play around them is going to change our gameplay significantly. Let's start with the big dog, Summon Airy. Summon Airy has two parts. It can go to a target that is your ally and give them a shield, or it can go towards an enemy and deal extra damage. If we look at Airy right now, we see the damage we do is 13 and the shielding we do is 35. And if you remember from the last guide, when we were talking about W value versus Q value, the healing and shielding is in our armor and magic resist favor because enemies are hitting us through armor and magic resist, and the Q damage is in the favor of the opponent because we are hitting against their armor and magic resist. This applies to Airy as well. So in the case of 2v2, if we have Q up, nothing else, and our ally is getting hit, yielding our ally for that 35 is actually much higher value because of how the armor and magic resist function. But if we are not having our ally in danger, then what we can end up doing is poking the enemy with the extra Airy damage. Here is a scenario that I see a lot in terms of maximizing Airy value. I want to hit the enemy champion with Airy, but I am afraid that my ally will eat the Airy up. And this is what's going to happen. You will lose Airy value by doing this, because the Airy hits the aura first on your ally, and if your ally is not being focused, it's a waste of Airy. You lose out on roughly 9 to 10 damage usually because of it. So we have to purposely play apart from our ally, still within range to influence the fight if something breaks out, but usually it will look like this. Nice, our Airy proc on the opponent. Here is another common scenario where Airy is applicable. We're getting ganked, and I want to maximize the value of my Airy while we are escaping. What I can do is while we are leaving, I Q to purposely hit my ally. I'm only gonna have one W because the CD is too long. So I wait for the Airy to come back, boom, Airy again. That's 60 extra shield that I have provided. And we can also do it with heal as like a third ability for level 2, or we can do it with E once that is unlocked. Because the E does bounce the Airy, even though it doesn't technically do any extra damage or anything. The mistake that I have seen myself do and other people do is when they're escaping, they're too far away from their ally, they Q, and then they give the aura, and the damage can be applicable, but if our goal is to escape, we've actually misplayed. And what's worse, Airy will take longer to come back, so we will probably not be able to use it again on our ally twice, which is optimal, and we lose out on a lot of escape value. Because, put it this way, in your full rotation, in a long form escape, which Sona can usually force, because the movement speed helps a lot, the damage reduction helps a lot, we have time, and our only fear is getting run down, you should be able to proc Airy multiple times, usually 3 or 4 in a long fight. That's the third one, and that's the fourth. So to recap really quick, there are 2 types of Qs. There is help your ally Q, and there's poke the enemy Q with the Airy. What you want to do should be both intentional and dependent on the situation. All right, that was a big rune out of the way. That was a lot of talking. A lot of the other ones are going to be a lot easier to focus on. So let's move over to the precision tree, my less preferable one, but one that's going to be useful. All right, while we're here, let's talk about the other runes in my main page that I take. Mana flow is going to be the most important to focus on, because in the early game, if you are playing for poke, you will eventually run out of mana if you ever have to use your W, which you probably will, because most games you're not going to allow you to free scale. If you wait for your mana flow band, which is a 15-second cooldown, you are poking them less, but it is extremely worth it a lot of the time because of your mana problems. Like, you can fish for Q on cooldown, and every second Q will be a mana flow. But if you're having mana struggles and you don't want to risk it, you can wait. Okay, now I will go for mana flow ban once it's back up. I have fully stacked it now, but you get the idea. You should be able to see the icon when you're playing, and the cooldown will show on the bottom right of your UI. Transcendence, you do not play around. It is a passive rune that will help you. Gathering Storm, you can technically play around when you hit the minute markers, but I wouldn't consciously play around it. It's something that's nice more than it is something you work around. Conditioning is more the same thing. It's a nice bonus. It will not help you long term. To think about it. And Revitalize is the real rune you are allowed to play around besides Airy and besides Mana Flow Ban because of the secondary effect. Heal and shields you cast or receive are 10% stronger on targets below 40% health. Mind you, this is not heal and shield power. This is a flat multiplier on top of your heal and shield power. So if, let's say I have 50% heal and shield power, so that effectively says 10% on the 50% bonus, now I have something that turns into 150 heal or shield, now becomes 165. It scales multiplicatively. And here is how we use it in the early game, especially. I am low. Now, if I W, me and the other target are going to heal bonus, I'll be healing 44 instead of 38 thanks to the bonus on Revitalize, but my ally will not get it. And that is fine. So it depends on who you're playing around. Am I playing for myself to survive? Okay, I don't mind clicking a W here. Your ally is at 40% HP. You can give them a shield. It's gonna work out. And when you're running away, you want to save your W after bouncing your Aries with your other abilities. If you think you're only getting one W because you don't have enough ability haste in the fight, you want to do it when they're below 40%. Hit them with both. The shield will proc first, which gives them the 10% bonus, and then the W will proc after giving that bonus. The heal will never bring them up before your shield because of the way that you use it in melee. But if you do it at range, for example, you W first, it lands, it brings them over 50, and then you tap them with shield, you lose a tiny bit of shield value. And these are all really small things, but it usually affects the game and has your ally survive with a little bit, more so than if you did not play around it. The last thing is your heal can also work the same way. Usually you want to wait out heal anyway because of Ignite. So using your W is okay because the value is so low. Like level 1 W is what, like 35 healing flat? I have extra because of scaling, but it's pretty low. And if you can wait out Ignite and get the heal at the end, you're getting the Revitalize value, you're getting no Ignite value, and your teammate will usually get out with the rest of the movement speed under your tower. We've talked a lot about this default page. Let's switch over to the precision page, and I'll talk about how we play around those as well. So because we are going to the precision page now, there are a couple things that we do have to change about our other gameplay. First off, we're going to be a lot switchier. Legend Haste does not give us armor and magic resist baits that conditioning would allow, or the bone plating for that matter. The damage is going to be less compared to like a shield bash. However, the bonus we get is Presence of Mind. Early game gives us a little extra mana, which is usually going to be relevant because if you're landing, let's say 5 to 10 Qs before your first recall, that usually amounts to, I want to say, an extra Q and extra W in lane, especially if you're getting auto weaves as well from like a bush or something, or if like a melee champion's walking up. The value you get from Presence of Mind is going to go up and up and up, depending on how easy it is for you to just throw out damage the opponent does not care about. And Legend Haste is something that you can passively stack, but the main thing is when your ally is doing Drake, before they finish it, if you can't get in range of the drag, you can max range W them, and if it lands before the Drake, you will get the assist. Or if you want to save some mana, hit the drag a little bit, and then throw a Q. This Q proc will also give you the assist on the Drake. And in terms of your in-lane gameplay, the main thing that changes is before we were kind of holding our W for the escape at the end because we wanted max revitalize value, here you want to try to throw your W first almost every time. It replaces your E power chord and you need to E power chord, throw the power chord first, like fish for it before you throw W. But the goal here is that we want W up again towards the end of the chase on escape. And this will go the same for if we're chasing them and we're committing to a full fight. Let's say I have E power chord stacked and we're doing a chase. I'm going to instantly give it to my ally because the all-in is guaranteed. The damage from that area is a lot weaker, and the opponents are usually forced to fight again. And then from there, I want to start bouncing Airy with W on CD. And in Escape, we are still going to try to bounce Airy more than we are going to damage the opponent. So the goal here will be to Power Chord tag ally with the Airy. You see how the Power Chord went to the enemy, that Airy went to the ally because I gave them the aura as fast as I could. And because I timed it right, I got the stack of Power Chord to rotate to the second Power Chord, which will inevitably come up. The last thing, we talked about it already once, but we will not be buying tier with this build because that is the entire point of taking Presence of Mind. You're not going to get Eric Angels. You're not going to get another item I will be talking about in the future. And your mana is a little reliant on getting the pick. So if you want to try to look for a pick, you're going to obviously play more for your E Power Chord a little bit. You do not want a W for sustain at all, almost, unless you're max mana, or you have blue, or you have a lot of regen already. But usually once you're like half mana, you want to save your mana for the fight. And the moment you get a reset, you are so free to spam, it does not matter. Other than that, in this page, I've taken Celerity and movement speed. This is one of the pages I know a lot of Sonas like to go. I talked to a higher elo Sona about this and they recommended it. And now that I thought about it more, also we have the movement speed shard. The movement speed allows you to find more autos, more Qs in the early game. If you notice, we have 335, that's a 10 bonus, and it only gets better with boots. So with this build, Swifties is pretty necessary because you're going Celerity. You want to be influential and force those presence stacks to reset. Here's the comparison. This 60 movement speed and the Celerity plus the movement speed rune are giving us 16 bonus. That's a nice amount. I don't know if it's significant or not. When I play it, I barely notice it. However, I just wanted to bring it up because a lot of Sonas like using it. And it scales especially with the rune page we went. Swifties are viable with the revitalized page, but I think they are utilized a little more with the presence page for the reasons mentioned. We still want to play our Airy procs, focus more on getting more Airy procs as opposed to low health value Airy procs that the Revitalize could provide. Honestly, it's best to go for that generally because waiting 2 seconds for Airy, like a 2-second minimum, means that when they're already below 40% HP for the Revitalize, you can only get so much value before the value of the Revitalize shield is not worth it. So this is a little easier to play around because just hitting an enemy and just hitting Airy is a pretty simple thing to do in comparison. But when playing around Revitalize, that changes the game a lot, and you were rewarded with that extra tankiness in the mid game. And the tankiness in early if you go bone plating, because you're able to go green tree. The last thing I want to talk about is how you play the mid game with these runes. The moment you start team fight or feel like a team fight is about to start, you are going to ignore your mana completely with this page. In the other page, you have to be a little conscious because you want your mana to survive towards the end. You don't want to waste your Ws if you're not full mana before the fight, because if a fight goes on for like a slow to medium amount of time, you will run out. With this page, that is never the case. We are allowed to spam. And we are confident the moment some guy dies, then that 15% mana regen will come back to help us out, leading to the second kill, leading to the third, etc., etc. The one negative about this page, if your ally dies because you did not have Revitalize, your value as a team goes down significantly because Sona loves Death Ball. Although Sona's mid game is very strong in the 2v2, the Death Ball in the late game is where you're going to find the most value with Revitalize, and this page does not provide that. But in solo queue, a lot of the time this page is going to suffice easily because the games are more scrappy, the fights are not necessarily 5v5 a lot of the time, and even if they are, your team's not always grouped. A lot of the time your teams will be coming from flanks, you're going to get less value with Moonstone shielding, so this page works around that, giving you that Legend Haste scaling as well in a different way, giving you more power chords and helping you in the more greedy ways than the Revitalized page would. All right, as we can see, there's a lot of rune optimizations on this champion. We could have these two different pages coexist reasonably, but we also have these little changes we're allowed to do, like to the individual runes, like Celerity versus Transcendence, like with Gathering Storm versus Water Walking, like with all the shards. Each game is going to ask you to change your runes a little bit with that base rune page in mind. I'll throw it up on the screen again. I recommend experimentation. I recommend thinking on your own and playing around them. And once you build a framework on how you like to build your runes, I think you'll be able to squeeze out a few more win rate percentages on this champion, especially if you're playing around it. The value of Aerie is extremely significant. The value of Presence and Revitalize are significant. Solving your mana problems with Mana Flow Ban, all of these will work together with your kit to make it so your early game is survivable and your mid to late game will let you thrive. All right, thank you for watching part 2 of the guide. Part 3 will be on the items, so look out for that one. And thank you for your time. Good luck in solo queue.